All right. All right, moving on, ladies and gentlemen, we have an interactive panel of small town model ordinances. Okay, and helping me on this is we're going to bring Miss Amy Vickers up, and she's going to kind of moderate this panel. But on the panel, we have an esteemed panel. We have, first we have Ms. Denise Savigno, who is the president of Connecticut Association of Conservation Districts. And Denise is an environmental professional with over 34 years of public sector experience working with local, state, federal government, including 20 years as a conservation director of the town of Greenwich. That's down at the Gold Coast, and the head of the town's water supply team. As president of the Connecticut Association of Conservation Districts, she serves as the Water Planning Council Advisory Group with me. We go to meetings together, you know, and so forth. So the Long Island Sound Study Citizens Advisory Group and the Connecticut Source Water Collaboration. She's a member of the State Water Plan Implementation Work Group and was recently elected chairman of the Connecticut Council on Soil and Water Conservation. So, hi Denise, how are you? Thank you for participating. Next, ladies and gentlemen, we have Miss Deborah Jones, and I was getting nervous as Deborah just got here and so forth. But Deborah is the Assistant Director of Planning and Development Services for the town of Groton. She has a Master's of Environmental Management from Duke University. Go Blue Devils, I guess, huh? Yeah. And her team was recently completed a comprehensive revision of the town's Water Resource Protection District zoning regulations, and these regulations are designed to protect the regional public drinking water supply reservoir while allowing for appropriate economic growth. So, and that's one of our senior topics today. Next, ladies and gentlemen, we have the only musician in the group. Mr. David Knopf, and Dave and I go back a long time, both him and his brother, but David was appointed for the first full-time health director of the town of Darien in September 2008 after serving as assistant department of health of the Farmington Valley Health District for many years, even decades. And David always has had a strong interest in policies associated with water, and when president of the Connecticut Environmental Health Association, directed the creation of the first CTEHA Water Committee. And currently he represents the Connecticut Association of Directors of Health and Local Health Officials on the State Water Planning Council Advisory Group, where he participated in the Drought Planning Work Group. Welcome, David. And he plays a mean bass too. So, and next, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mike Glidden. Mike just got here too. I was starting to perspire here. I says, "Where's Mike?" Okay, I thought I have to put on my tap dancing shoes. Anyway, but Mike is currently served as the Director of Planning and Community Development for the town of Simsbury, and Mr. Glidden has been employed by the town of Simsbury since November 2013. He's still on the honeymoon. Prior to the employment of the town of Simsbury, he worked for the Waterford and town of West Hartford, and Mr. Glidden is a current Vice President of the Connecticut Association of Zoning Enforcement Officials, and he holds a bachelor's degree in geography from CCSU and is certified flood planner manager with the State Association of Flood Plan Managers, or Plain Managers, I'm sorry. All right, did Andy make it? Andy Tierney? Okay. But we also have, coming out of the pulpit, we're bringing in a left-hander, Mr. Dwight Merriam, who was, where's Dwight? Oh, there he is. You were hiding behind Mike. He's keeping an eye on him, but Dwight has worked in his capacity with Simsbury for many years, so I'm going to turn it over to Amy, and Amy's going to start the discussion off going, and we can go from there.
Well, great. I'm just jumping into this role now. I'm telling you, it's happening. Okay, so I just have to ask Dave what we're going to do. What we're going to do is have each person, I don't know, like 5 minutes, give their spiel, and then we're going to have a little bit of discussion. So, Denise, may we start with you?
Okay, great. So, hi, everybody. Again, I'm Denise Savigno, and I just recently retired, or actually, I guess it's been about a year, with the town of Greenwich, which is where I did as the conservation director, which is where I have, I would say, most of my experience dealing with the water supply issue. And probably you kind of gathered from the previous presentation that Greenwich has been ground zero for dealing with drought and water supply issues for a while. I've served in Greenwich for 20 years and stepped right into it when I became the conservation director, but certainly it was a problem before that. And it's one of the reasons that Greenwich is one of the few towns that has a water shortage ordinance. And I think one of the unique things about our water shortage ordinance is it doesn't just cover public drinking water supply from a utility, it also covers private wells. And that has been something that's really important for our town, even though I think a lot of people think, okay, southwestern Connecticut, larger cities, and no one's on private wells, but that is not the case. So approximately 30% of our population is served by private wells, the rest served by the utility. And we have some challenges. We actually had a USGS study done several years ago that is showing that we are depleting our water resources in terms of groundwater resources at a faster rate than is naturally being recharged by precipitation. So that's a challenge for us. So I guess the one thing I would say, in my experience dealing with municipal water ordinances, I think they're critical for water protection, and I think it's important for municipalities to step up to the plate on this. There aren't that many communities that are involved in water supply, and they kind of defer to the water utility, and I don't think that's a good position. I think once you end up having some water challenges, the municipalities get put full thrust into this, and I think probably all the municipalities are here because they've had to deal with it, but I think we should be a little bit more proactive, particularly given the changes in precipitation and some of the challenges we have with climate change, that we really should be more proactive on this from a statewide level. I think that all ordinances need to cover wells. We cannot talk about water supply in this state just from a public drinking water supply with the large utilities or even the smaller utilities. We need to look at those residential wells. And the last thing I'm going to say is, although we have ordinance and it has served us well, including during the last drought, it is a water shortage. And we talk about the model ordinances that are out there dealing with drought preparedness and being a drought ordinance or a water shortage ordinance. And I would say that we really need to talk about them in terms of conservation ordinances, not just dealing with the emergency supply. And I think the work that Aquarion has done is kind of basically shows that. It's like we have been able to stay out of drought. And the work that they did in 2016 and really in 2017, they implemented the two-day water ban on outdoor irrigation, or so allowance of only 2 days a week water irrigation on lawns. That avoided us having a second major drought and major restrictions in 2017 that we had in 2016. And being able to avoid that just by putting in those regulations, I think, is important. And so I think we need to be looking at that long term and how that plays out. And I guess one of the last things I would say is, and this is why I think it's so critical, that I don't think the municipalities or the state can just hand everything over and say, let's let the water utilities handle this. I think that the municipalities need to be involved. And one of the things we're looking at now is, until we had the decoupling, we couldn't really talk about water conservation in this state. There was really challenges because we saw that this loss of revenue by the water utilities was preventing really good discussion on water conservation. And we still have that challenge because now our private companies are able to deal with it, but the municipal and regional water authorities are still having problems with that whole idea of, the rate structure and what they can charge for water, and if we do water conservation, there's a revenue problem for them. So I think we need to make sure that that municipalities are really involved and really engaged in this, and that we need to take it to that level, and the model ordinances are one way to get there. So with that, I'll hand it over to.
Great, thank you, Denise. Yes, and Deborah, please, yeah.
Hi, so I'm Deb Jones. I work in Groton, which is on the other side of the state from Greenwich. And I'm here because Groton uses our zoning regulations to protect water quality. We've done that since 1987. We use an overlay zone to protect the watershed that feeds our surface water reservoir. This watershed has industrial land, it has commercially zoned land, as well as residential. So the overlay zone will regulate or even prohibit uses that might be allowed in the underlying zone. And we use that to protect the reservoir from stormwater runoff, from uses that might not be appropriate, that might be inclined to produce spills or hazardous materials. And again, since 1987, we've done that. We just recently updated those regulations to make them a little easier to use, make them a little more clear, make them a good deal more lengthy. But I think we worked with the utility company, Groton Utilities, to make sure that they were comfortable with the regulations that we were proposing. And I think we have a really good product that's worked well for a number of years, and it really has protected the town's water supply and the water quality supply.
Great, thank you, Deborah. We're going to just change the lineup a little bit just to stay in themes, and we're going to call Dave Knopf next, and then we're going to have Danielle, and then move on to Mike, who also has a formal presentation. So Dave, please go ahead.
I was just preparing my notes. First, I'd really like to, as a health director for the town of Darien, one of the 4 towns that Aquarion was discussing, Jeff Milton Aquarion was discussing before, I would really like to commend the work that Aquarion did during the time of that drought, coordinating things with the communities that were directly affected. There was a tremendous ability to communicate to the public and to town officials so that everybody understood the situation that was going on at that time. It was a great example of partnership, including the state, local government, and industry working together to try to address the problem. And we got lucky. It started raining, finally, and even going, and I personally, when Darien adopted an emergency declaration subject to the commissioner's declaration of the water emergency at the time, going before the Board of Selectmen, and one of the selectmen who voted against declaring an emergency said, well, it always rains sooner or later. And so the message is, there does have to be preparations. And now that it's raining, nobody's talking about drought any longer. So, that planning, as we said, has to be done, and it has to be completed, and we need to be ready. A couple other comments I want to make, and I want to commend Attorney Merriman on bringing up the issue of zoning. Zoning and water quantity. Zoning really has historically just taken the fact that in Connecticut we have plenty of water. And that's not always the case, especially when there's wells involved. And with respect to available water, you can see how much water is available in a surface reservoir, but you can't see how much water is available on the ground. And groundwater monitoring is a very key component of going forward in the future and understanding our potential development capabilities in certain areas. The one other thing that I want to also make a comment on is depletion of groundwater. It's also dependent on sewers. So if you have an area that has well water and you have sewers, ultimately what's happening is there's not as much groundwater replenishment occurring. So zoning, again, needs to take into account the water budget. And without having water being reintroduced into the aquifers for sewering areas, and then wanting to have intense developments occur with that on wells, we could very well be having groundwater problems and shortages in the future. So that's just something that we need to think about.
Great, thank you, Dave. Super, and if we can move on to Danielle with the Ledge Light District, and looking forward to hearing your comments.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Danielle Holmes. I'm
great. Okay.
Mike and I flipped.
Okay, yeah, super.
But I need to come up here because I want to, that's Miriam.
Yep, come on up, and then we'll go on to Mike again.
Yeah, I want to, I'm Mike Glidden's warm-up act.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go. So I want to set the stage.
I got a tough
Yeah, we're very
background.
good. So I just want to set the stage for the focus that we have here in this session, which is on local planning and development of regulatory strategies. I'm not going to talk about the details of what is in a particular plan. I do want to call to your attention, if you don't know it, and I guess I'm going to guess most people do that are in this room, that the Water Planning Council promulgated in November 2018 a drought preparedness and response plan. If you have not seen that plan, or just Google your way into it, it's relatively new, being November 2018, the Connecticut Drought Preparedness and Response Plan, which will take you part way of where you need to go. So, but this is the other presentation. Thanks. If I could, there, okay. This is the soundbite brain dump version of what you need to know about planning for this activity. Denise really pointed out at the outset that this is a planning process. And she also pointed out that we need to go beyond emergency planning at some point. But I think emergency planning is a very good place for people to start at the local level. It's first is life safety. We need to start with that. If we have nothing, we need to start with that. But it doesn't take much to go from there to a more comprehensive plan regarding supply and demand and balancing those. So here's basically what this process looks like. As I said, I was educated first as a planner and then went to law school. My professor said, really, planning is only three things. What do you have? What do you want? And how do you get it? And that's, Mike's going to describe a little bit about how that process, beyond a little bit, about what a great process they had in Simsbury in developing that using this model. The other thing that I always want to tell people that we sometimes forget even as planners is that this process of planning is iterative and interactive. If you remember that, I've done my job here. Iterative and interactive. Iterative because each step builds on the prior one. Here's the sort of rational planning model, identifying the problem, determining alternatives, picking among alternatives, testing, implementing the alternatives, and then doing some feedback. Did it work? Each of those steps builds on the prior step. And each of those steps, all the way down, you don't wait till the end and consider what happened. As you select, for example, alternatives, you may need to feed back to your objectives. What are you trying to accomplish? And you may have to change your objectives as you realize that there are certain alternatives no longer available, or new ones that you hadn't thought of, or ones that are difficult to implement, or ones that are easier to implement. So iterative, each step builds on the other, and think of it as an interactive process of feeding back on the steps before. And you'll see that in the presentation we have here next. So here's basically what you have to do. What are your objectives? If it's emergency response to a drought or low supply condition, then that's what you want to talk about. Set out your objectives in detail. Assessment, what do you have? There's a lot that can be done at the local level. I think Simsbury is just at the beginning of this process of identifying at the local level and using a fine-grained approach to determine residential, commercial, office, industrial, agricultural uses. What are their demands? What are their demands over certain times of the year? Tie it into land use. You need to be forward-looking in terms of population and growth and demand. You need to think about what's the impact of drought. Will there be a big increase? You know, maybe 5% is a number that I see kicked around in the literature during drought conditions. And what about average demand versus peak demand? Peak may be twice average or more or less. You need to know that at the local level. The state's not going to give you that. They're not doing that at the local level, but local governments can do that. Supply, that's where you work with your water company and also local supplies, and then comparing them, balancing them, taking a look. Then options. What are your options with regard to planning for this water use? Demand. I think, what do we have, 3 stages in the Simsbury? Two stages? But now we have, 5 stages called out in one state plan or suggestion. I've seen 7 or 8 stages. There's nothing magic about stages. The first one's usually education. Tell people use less water, please. All right, and they can all the way through mandatory shutdowns a portion of the system. But you need to decide what those stages are going to be. And here's what you can do: voluntary, mandatory, rationing, and what percentage reductions are you going to get along the way? Government action. There's a lot that government can do by itself, shutting down watering of athletic fields and the like, or pools, or outside sprayers during the summer, and working on retrofits and pricing, and then augmenting supply temporarily or permanently. The triggering criteria for these stages of action: what is it that causes you to take action, particularly during an emergency? You need to identify what each one of those triggers are going to be and tie it into the stages, as Simsbury has done with regard to increasing levels of more coercive measures to make sure that people don't run out of water during an emergency situation. And then what do you do with regard to demand reduction over time without regard to an emergency or during an emergency? Finally, big issue: enforcement. How do you enforce? Who's going to enforce? Who gives the tickets? Who collects the fines? How are you going to do that? You need to think about that, because none of this is going to work unless there is some enforcement mechanism that's fair and equitable. And then this feedback and assessment of the entire system. One last point I'll leave with you. An early part of that planning process. I mean, what works in Bolton is different than what works in New Britain, okay, because of the institutional infrastructure. One significant risk for smaller communities is that they take on a more elaborate, complex, and institutional infrastructure requiring system than they can support. So be careful during the early stages of what do you have in order to implement this. So now we're going to see how it really works. Now we can switch over to Mike, please.
Great. Thank you, Dwight. And Mike is going to be up next. Let me just mention there's cards on all your tables. So if you have questions or comments, if you want to write those down, Mike's going to be the last one. Then we'll get into a discussion. Just write those down, and then we'll go around, I guess, and collect them, and then make them part of the discussion. Mike, thank you.
Thank you. Actually, Dwight, that's a great intro to our situation. So in Simsbury, Northern Hartford County, 2016, we had some drought conditions up there. Members of our Conservation Commission proposed an ordinance, and modeled it after the Greenwich ordinance, and kind of going what Dwight said. So we took someone else's model and we tried making it fit in Simsbury. This was an effort that was led by the commission, really. It was submitted to the Board of Selectmen, so we started in 2016. It was spring of 2017 when we got into the public hearing process. During the public hearing process, this was not a favorable experience. Even though we were still in drought conditions in Northern Hartford County, we had one of our service providers show up at the hearing and testify against a drought ordinance. We had the issues with how are you going to enforce this ordinance. The proposal that was submitted had the police department doing the enforcement. Well, that was proposed, and yet no one asked the chief of police, are you ready to go around and issue tickets to people? There was no staff member who was shepherding this. So public hearing closes, and we had, like I said, it was a very negative public hearing process. This was now, we're into 2017. It's an election year. We changed the form of government. We go from a Board of Selectmen form of government into a town manager. The town manager puts this as a priority. She wants to actually pursue this development of a drought ordinance, and the Board of Selectmen forms a working group. One of the members, there was 2 members from the Board of Selectmen, one was in favor of the concept, one was still on the fence. Then various staff members were identified to join this working group. So what we did was, as a group, we took our 2016 proposal and kind of looked at all the areas that from either staffing perspective or from comments that we had from the public or interested parties, what were the issues? Why did it not work in Simsbury? I think a little different in Simsbury is we had 3 service providers at the time. We had the Terriffill Fire District, the Terriffill Water Company, which is a very small, that's in the top right-hand corner of this map here. We had Avon Water, which is now Connecticut Water, down in the lower, and then Aquarion throughout the rest of the town where it's highlighted in blue. That's the service areas. Then we had a lot of part of the town that's served by public wells. That 2016 proposal had different trigger events. You treated people who were on public water different from how they were, if they were residents served by public utility. There was other issues that came up during the process, such as I said earlier, the different utility providers. Terriffill Fire District was one of the utility companies that showed up at the public hearing and said, we have regulations in place for our ratepayers. And if it's a time of conservation, we tell them already you can't water your lawn, you have to limit your water use, or we shut your service off. We were putting them in a position where the town would be issuing citations, and then the district would be issuing citations that they're getting their service from, and they felt it was kind of like, so who exactly is in charge? Because you may say it's a time of conservation, yet we disagree based on our knowledge of our system. We have 3 golf courses in Simsbury, one of which was a town-owned, the other 2 were privately held. We had input from the courses saying, like, what are you doing? Like, some of us have state diversion permits that we have limits. We have conservation measures that are built in. So we know, like, we need to do some smart water planning to protect our assets. So we looked at all these different aspects and we said, okay, let's look at revising the water shortage ordinance. We had several working group meetings where we actually went out and met, for example, the Terriffill Fire District. We went to their facility and said, well, we understand you had your concerns at the public meeting. How can we draft an ordinance that addresses your concerns entirely so we don't have a conflicting document versus your legal rules for the ratepayers? This also went through a legal review, went to a public hearing, and was ultimately adopted. So what does our regs say now? So we have 2 stages. We have one is stage 1 where it's a voluntary conservation. So at stage 1, we acknowledge that there's a threat, that we need to start conserving our water usage and really put in some safeguards to prevent a depletion of water. At stage 2, that means, hey, the voluntary measures aren't working. Now mandatory measures are going into place. When they go to stage 2, the Board of Selectmen has to have a public hearing, and we have a whole host of items within our ordinance, such as, you can't water your lawn, you can't wash your car outside, certain aspects on filling your swimming pool, if you can't do that. We built in a waiver process because one of the things the Board of Selectmen was concerned with, especially for the golf course perspective, was we own one of the golf courses. It's a public asset. If they're doing responsible water planning, we want to be able to say to the superintendent at Simsbury Farms, yeah, we're in a don't water the lawn stage, but we understand that there are certain things you have to do. You may have to syringe your greens in the afternoon. You may have to keep you're watering your tee boxes and your fairways at a lower rate, but you still have to do it. So how do we handle that? The other thing is, although I don't think it's up here, was we didn't separate the difference between someone who's served by public water or on a private well. Because, it's a water problem it's for the greater good of the community. We're a little different situation. Our service providers get their water from production wells in town. We're not served by a utility that has a reservoir. So it's the groundwater that everyone is drawing from. It's not just the private homeowner. So, and with that, that's our new ordinance. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mike. That was terrific. Before we jump into the question, just a couple of observations. It seems like so many of us agree that, we have to have good, drought response rules, perhaps permanent watering restrictions, well protection, but particularly on the local level, on a small town level, the whole issue of enforcement and resources to make that happen, it seems to me, is the really big question. So one of the things I want to just throw back to the group, and then, pardon me, Denise, I'm looking at you because I know you dealt with this in 2016 in Greenwich. Could you talk a little bit about sort of, again, you had a water supply Aquarian, which you're working with, and you also have this private well issue. And could you just talk a little bit about sort of how you dealt with that, and also so many communities have to scramble in these situations. I just, if you could just talk about internally within the town, how you dealt with that whole issue.
Okay, so the town of Greenwich, like I said, had been dealing with the water supply issue for a while. So we already had a water shortage ordinance when I came to the town in 1998. The interesting part of that was one of the things I was able to do as the conservation director, it kind of was falling under the Conservation Commission, and I reported directly to them, was to pull together a water supply team, which included, similar to what Simsbury did, but included our director of health, our fire chief because of the fire suppression, as well as the first selectman and our town administrator. So we pulled together this team that was really looking at water supply. So when we got to 2016, we already had something in place, and it wasn't our first time around the block. From the time I started in Greenwich, over my 20 years, we've had mandatory water restrictions, I think, 5 times, and voluntary to almost mandatory, probably another handful of times, 3 or 4 times. Prior to 2016, the town did all the enforcement, because what the discussion, and I was co-chair of the state drought management plan, working on that for a very long time. And one of the discussions that was happening was that the water utility said, we don't have enforcement. Once we get into a drought, we can't tell somebody they can't use the water. So that's what we were hearing from the private, let me clarify that, from the private utilities, which was Aquarion and the predecessor owner. The regional water authorities were saying they did. But we were having this discussion that. So in Greenwich's case, we were dealing with a private water company that was saying, we don't have enforcement, we can't enforce. So the town was the only one to do that and was stepping up. And so I had in place variances, how to do variances. Some of the things that come up, car washes. What do you do with the car washes? What do you do with power washing? Again, the filling of pools, and of course the lawn irrigation, and then this whole idea of groundwater versus surface water supplies. So we had things, we already had a variance in place, and I was, it was interesting. So when we came into 2016, and now because of the decoupling, Aquarian was ready to step up to the plate and really handle this. They went to, DPUC and basically, and the Water Planning Council, and they basically said, you know what, you can't enforce water restrictions. And the town, I have to say, was happy to let Aquarion do that. But what we always maintained was that the town, has put these restrictions on. We put in mandatory restrictions across the board. And what we said was, we will defer as long as they're doing what we think should be done. We'll defer to what Aquarion is doing, and we'll only manage the groundwater restrictions. But if any time during a water emergency we felt that the water utility was not stepping up to the plate the way Aquarion did, and I have to say, like David, they did a fantastic job for us, so we were very comfortable with that. But if they hadn't, and it hadn't been the case previously, the town was prepared to do what needed to be done to do the water, the drought restrictions. So. Yeah.
Any comments from the panel on that? Mike,
in Darien, we also had an existing ordinance for emergency situations with respect to drought. And Aquarian, as I said, and as Denise just said, really managed the situation when there were violations occurring and then water that it shouldn't have. They actually stepped up and did the enforcement. Our police department made it clear that they have other more important law enforcement activities to do. And even though the ordinance that we had on the books directed the police department to do that, they were not willing to do it. And again, fortunately, it started raining before we reached critical mass on that situation. But the enforcement of this piece is a problem. It's a smaller police department, and there's a lot of households in town, and they didn't want to be the water police. So enforcement is a problem.
Yeah.
If I could just add, in
Sure, yeah.
Greenwich quickly, that our police department did step up and they would do some enforcement if we needed them to. They were more than happy. I will say that I think people make enforcement a bigger deal than it is. What we have found is the peer pressure, and I think Aquarian showed all the comments they were getting from the neighbors. Because what we did was we would have people call up and they'd say, you're telling me I can't use water, what am I going to do? Or they got reported by someone, and it was like, well, who? And when they found out it was their neighbor who reported them, they immediately stopped. So peer pressure, I will say Greenwich has gone through this so many times. The peer pressure in Greenwich to do this, to do good water conservation, is amazing. Doesn't mean everybody does exactly what they need to do, and that's why having some regulations is in place. But I think the correlation I like to make is we all have stop signs in our community. The police don't get everybody rolling through a stop sign, but they're still an effective tool. And I think saying that we're not going to do water conservation because we can't enforce it, if we get 80% of the people, or 85 or 75% of the people to follow the rules, we're doing really good with in terms of water conservation. And worrying about the bad actors, yeah, we need to do education, we need to do the enforcement, but I don't think we should hold up water conservation because of the enforcement issue.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, does anyone have any comments in there or questions out in the audience you want to bring up or comment on what's been said? Yes, please go ahead.
How do you manage the private well situation with the water sections, which I totally understand? A lot of our clients are on private wells, but they feel that's theirs, it's their land, you're telling them what to do with their resources under their land, and I could explain to them blue in the face, you realize we're all pulling from the same aquifers, and they just don't get it. Like, they're gonna do what they want, and I said, as long as you're doing it, we're not gonna do it.
So in Greenwich, the way we handle the private wells is that they have to comply, and I will say from an enforcement perspective, just like you do with most, let's say zoning the same way, you don't catch every zoning violation, so when someone reports it, you go out. That said, one of the things that we did a lot of education, and it was the neighborhood associations. So the neighborhood associations were very effective in getting folks to do what they needed to do. We know that there's some real challenges with people who have a lot of money who think that they own the water. And I have to say, this is one of the things when people started talking about the public trust and not wanting it in the water supply plan the way it was, the state water plan the way it was, is the town of Greenwich was really upset because we actually used the idea of the public trust, saying water is a public trust resource, and that's what our ordinance is based on, that it's a public trust resource, and so that's what we talk about. Mm-hmm. And you do have the situations, and we have the situation where somebody's pumping and pumping over here, and they're impacting their neighbor's well. And you have that happen once, or just some anecdote about it, and let's just say it's a problem.
Yeah, and to pick up on your comment, it's well taken that I think particularly in rural areas and non-wealthy areas where you have people living, far away, or they even have an estate that's remote. They don't have a meter on their well. Who's watching? And yet the local stream or river is suffering from that. And I don't have an answer on enforcement for that. I don't know if anyone on the panel has any comments about that. But I almost wonder in terms of a future workshop, again, thinking forward on this enforcement issue, as we're saying, again, if you've got an affluent community, you've got a very responsible water supplier, that's great. But if you don't, what do you do? And what are some of the tools that small communities can use or neighboring communities can use to work together during a drought or a short-term emergency to gain better compliance? So anyway, I'm just throwing that idea out. But any other comments on this in terms of really getting those really remote areas where you can have people, again, pulling on the system? And Danielle, I see you tapping.
Yeah,
yes.
this isn't working. I think it's going to be really convincing people that this is something to do, and I think education is the biggest part of it, and often the hardest.
And I think the education in Greenwich was that we've had mandatory restrictions so many times that, like I said, it wasn't our first rodeo, so we've been doing it. And what our police did, I think, I can't remember if it was like 2002 or 2004, we had a drought. Well, I always get confused between when we have the drought and when we have the flood, because, and sometimes it's the same year, so. But the police had gone out, and rather than go to individual homes, they actually went up and down streets, and they would, over the bullhorn, call out the name of the house, like, you're irrigating your lawn and you shouldn't be.
Oops.
So I couldn't believe, I didn't tell the police department to do this, they came up with this on their own. Let me tell you, it was very effective, and they liked doing it, so it was a good thing.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I just learned last week that the city of Sacramento, California has an app. And so if you're walking by, someone who's watering on the wrong day, you can, push the app and it will geolocate where the violation is happening. So I think it's a little bit Big Brother-ish, but yeah, timestamp it and take a picture. I want to go back to, again, any more questions here? Anybody want to raise their hand who hasn't said anything? Or Dave, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, Deborah, if you, in developing your ordinance in Groton there, did you have much interaction with Danielle and their
Oh, yeah,
health
we
district
work
as far as
closely
that
together.
goes? And just talk a little bit about that
Yeah,
and how
absolutely.
that played out.
Yeah, we work both with Ledgelight Health District, our local regional health district, as well as the utility company. We're all interested in the same thing, clean water and making sure that it stays clean for distribution. We are in southeastern Connecticut. We haven't had a drought situation. And we're actually supplying other communities with our water. So it really helped to work with Ledgelight, which is a regional entity, to be able to have connections with adjacent towns.
And Danielle, did you find that communication helpful on the health department side?
Certainly, we love communication.
I think one thing with Deb's description, I think you said it dated back to 1987 as
Did.
part of the zoning ordinance. One of the fundamental questions you have to answer is, where are you going to sit this thing?
That's true.
It could be in zoning.
Yep.
It could be a freestanding ordinance like Simsbury, or it could be a hybrid. We face the same thing with NetBlue, where we may actually have a hybrid in many situations where part of what we're doing is in zoning because it deals with development approvals and land use, which is not what you're trying to accomplish in Simsbury.
that ordinance also, there was a drought management plan that was adopted that was the predecessor to Aquarian, but Aquarian, Darien, and a few in our water supply all were bought into this plan that even had more details. And I will say that the way that we implement the drought, when there's a drought and the emergency, is we take it to the Board of Selectmen, myself, and the Director of Health presents it to them. This is where we are, this is the water situation, this is what but we do recommend, we do somewhat choose from that menu, even though we can do it all, we choose not to implement it all. And the reason that we do that usually is based on time of year. So we've had winter droughts. Well, if you need to reduce water in winter droughts, talking about irrigating your lawn doesn't help. So it all depends on the time of year, what we're doing. Filling the swimming pools is really critical in May and June, and when you're dealing with a fall drought, those don't. So we really did focus on that. Just one thing I wanted to mention is the golf course thing is one of the things we did, and the golf courses do a great job, and they have best management practices, and what we said is if you have an emergency water supply plan on file in the land use office and we expect you to be following that, then they weren't subject to regulations, and that's how we handled the golf courses. And just the last thing before we close is I want to just say that there's a nexus between water use and energy use. So from the sustainability perspective, when you talk about sustainable Connecticut and where we need to go, I think we need to keep our eye on the ball there as well. So.
Great. Thank you, Denise. Hey, if anybody, I'm just going to throw this out there. We're finishing up we got about 10 minutes left in their time slot. Would anybody object to going right to the panel? We'll eliminate the break and we can get you out of here earlier. Mary Ann has a 3 o'clock flight, and I'd like to open it up for questions for the panel if we can. Tom, would that be agreeable with everybody? Is that okay? That way we can get you out of here early. Fantastic. Okay, Mary Ann, come out. Tom, Mr. Irrigation, come on up here. Okay. So that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I think. The role of enforcement. There comes that enforcement again. And the question number 2 is, what are the repercussions of violating the irrigation schedule? So I think Denise touched on that a little bit. So Tom, if you want to.
I have no idea.
Yeah, so I can answer that.
Thank you.
I know from Greenwich's perspective, we adopted that, their schedule. Not only and we said across the town, it's not going to be one neighbor that gets one thing because they're on, public water supply and somebody else is on wells. We just adopted it across the town, the schedule they put in place.
Great. All right. So any questions here? Mary Ann, come on up here. Get up here. Okay. We've got all of our resources. We have no questions now. Okay. Well, we're gonna go by the seat of our pants here, and that's why we have Mr. Microphone. Okay, and your name and where you're from?
I'm Ted Moriarty, and I'm an irrigation consultant, and I'm consulting with Aquarian about their variance program, and I've been doing it since its inception in 2017. But anyway, my question is for the panel, and I think this might come into the ordinance development, ordinance implementation, maybe some development issues, zoning might come into this too. And my question is, for years now, there's been that voluntary green building program, LEED, correct? And EPA WaterSense has been around for quite some time, excuse me, and they have a spec. Now, of course, you've got green codes, like the ASHRAE Green Building Code, the IPMO Green Building Code, Golden Globes. Down in Florida, they have Florida Water Star that's got, landscape things in it. Do any of those things play a role in development of ordinances, or should they? And perhaps zoning issues going forward from a developer standpoint? I'd just like to get your thoughts on that. Thank you.
So I'll take a shot at answering this question, because it's one that we started addressing the very first year that the Alliance for Water Efficiency was in business. We knew that codes and standards were a really important way to set threshold levels for water efficiency, but they were all saying different things. And getting them harmonized and consistent turned out to be a whole lot more work than we expected. It's been 12 years now that we've been at it, and they're still not harmonized. So all the ones you've mentioned, we have representatives on every single one of those negotiating tables, and we still can't get agreement, largely because many of those codes have a strong industry representation, so there's pushback depending upon the makeup of the individual committees. The bottom line is that although they're all different, a local community can choose which ones it wants to apply. The green codes are a matter of local voluntary adoption. So it's not like a building code or a plumbing and mechanical code that the state adopts and everybody complies. The green codes are the next layer of efficiency. So you can choose which ones you like. And some are better than others. But what we're trying to do is get it harmonized. So to give you a simple example, there are some green codes that allow multiple shower heads in a bathroom, which is not very water efficient. So these are the kinds of issues we're struggling to deal with to make sure that something like the WaterSense Home Standard is going to be the most efficient there is. So it takes a lot of stakeholder effort. It's not perfect yet. But I guess to answer your question, you can choose which one you like the best. The ASHRAE one is actually pretty good. So you might want to choose which one you'd like to implement at a local level.
Just a comment to follow up on Ted's observation, which I've seen the same thing, in that I think we sometimes spend a lot of time developing standards and codes, but don't always think about enforcement. And it seems to me that if we have to have an enforcement plan. We talked about this in terms of drought. Sometimes you're thrown asunder, suddenly having to enforce. But that's the problem. It's like on paper we have so many good things written down, but if there's not enforcement behind it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, so one of the things we were looking at is the way that we put lawns in. And for example, they all require so much topsoil and all this. And we all know that none of that stuff really happens the way it should. And that's one of the challenges. So, the irrigation contractors are left with people who are complaining that they need more water. And basically what they need is better soil conditions. So I think one of the things we really need to look at is, almost every zoning ordinance in the state already has good regulations, so where do we need to maybe tweak those, but also looking at that enforcement. How do we make sure that the lawns are put in appropriately with the right submaterials and whatever, so that we do have healthy lawns with healthy soils? And then I think, and also looking at this whole issue of, because we always talk about just getting rid of demand. Well, if we want to get rid of demand, there's ways of doing that, and that has to do with less lawns. And so should we limit, and I'm not going there yet, but should we limit the lawns? The Great American Lawn is a real problem for outdoor use, and we need to change that mentality, and is there a way for us to do that appropriately?
If I could just add, sure. I really like what you're saying about soils, because it's so true. I have seen landscape ordinances. Now, I don't know if they've, gone into effect or anything. That do require, if you're going to install a new lawn, you have to have 6 inches of loam, underneath that installed lawn. And I think it's 12 inches in some of the ordinances I've seen for planted beds. And, a lot of people don't realize that those soil conditions, that's water conservation from a different angle, and that we don't really tend to look at that. But you're right, enforcing that is really tough. And I can tell you, yesterday, I live in Boston, but obviously I'm working with Aquarion, so I come down here a lot, and I'm a Connecticut native. I was on a job in Boston yesterday, and believe me, I had a dig in this, and was not happy. It was a new development. It had this much loam, and the rest was just construction debris.
Yeah.
And that's what you see out there, and I'm sure that everybody else would.
Yeah. Yeah.
Foundation. And it's just all that stuff is underneath. And then all the
Yeah.
metal gets put around it, and they try to roll along.
Yeah, they invert it, and then they drive all their equipment over it, so now they've compacted
Beat it
it.
down.
And then, if they put topsoil on, but I have to say, I swear that there are times when they just come in and just bring sod, and think that that's their 6 inches. And, and so I do feel for the folks who are trying to take care of this, but the problem is, more water is not gonna solve that problem. So we really do need to address this issue. It's a huge issue.
So I'd like to ask those, because we have zoning enforcement officers here in the room, so how do we fix this? If it already says that as a specification in your zoning ordinance, what's the difficulty in getting it enforced? Yes, it makes you unpopular with the developers, but the message would get out there, right? And then wouldn't behavior change if enforcement was improved? So,
So this is something we run into all the time on large-scale commercial sites, okay? We'll get specifications. Brian Riccesi could have done them himself that are absolutely perfect, and we always bid the specifications. But at the end of the day, that's going to the lowest bidder, okay? And that person's going to come in, and we get to service it and repair it down the road, but they're going to come in, do that job, in, out, leave, and there's no checks and balances in place to do it. So it could have been designed perfectly from the get-go, but the builder's going to use who's ever cheaper. And to be honest with you, towns and municipalities are worse. Okay, you guys go to the lowest bidder all the time, and the stuff we repair on athletic fields and stuff, because some school department wanted it perfect, but then took it out of their budget, and they wonder why pipes are breaking, and stuff's not better than sand, and, nozzles weren't installed correctly, or the flow meters, and it's money.
So I think it is an issue is identified. I know I'm bringing this issue as part of the, state water implementation team, because the state water plan implementation team, because it is huge and much bigger probably than people realize, for a whole host of implications, from a water quality, from stormwater runoff. It's multiple, so we really do need to address it. And there is an enforcement challenge, but I think it's with everything that has to do with, it's basically environmental economics, is that, we push off these externalities and we look at it like, like I said, go to the lowest bidder, and we're not looking at the true cost of what we're doing by doing that and the real impacts to the communities. So part of it will be education, letting the communities know how important it is, because I don't think everybody really understands how critical enforcing that particular thing is. We enforce building codes because we perceive it as a public safety issue, but we don't really perceive having 6 inches of topsoil is a public safety issue. But if it's about water supply and if it's about some other things, maybe we need to start looking at it that way.
but if it's already in your code, why not just alert the applicant when they get the approval that you will enforce this period, so you be forewarned that this is what you expect?
You can do that, I think, when there's a certificate of occupancy attached to it. You can, no town has inspectors who can be out there checking on landscaping installation. But you can ask for certification from the landscaper, you can ask for samples. I think the problem comes in with, after the CO is issued, and, 2-3 years down the road, I'm just improving over here, and you don't need permits for that, there's no inspection for that. That's where the real disconnect comes in, I think.
Man, we got some great discussions happening, huh? Oh, my God. The other thing, too, circling back around, the title of our workshop today is we have to find a balance between that sustainable development. We want to make sure we're sustainable. By the same token, you don't, or, as all towns do, and, as my boss, Susan, over there said, we got to improve on the tax base and develop and, attract businesses, is to find that balance, okay, to do that. And, I don't know, Mary Ann, you got any thoughts on that? Okay.
Well, I started my life being a state regulator, so I always say, pound the hammer and just tell them this is what it's going to be, period. That's the only way eventually we'll get through this. The developers are all doing the same things that we've been discussing here, and it's because they're getting away with it and they can.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So in the state of Connecticut, Southwest Connecticut, which has the biggest drought problem, is the economic driver. If that part of the state doesn't figure out the water supply issue, and the real estate market drops off because guess what? People don't have enough water, and understand the relationship not only between the quantity of water, but the quality of water, because now we're having problems with harmful algal blooms in these same watersheds that are drought-stricken. That's not going to be good for our state. So I think we need to be paying attention to this, because you want to dry up the economics of the state faster than anything, run out of water.
You know, and I think therein lies, you know, where we started off today, right, Lori? The state water plant, okay? So it's a roadmap, I think, that offers a lot of tools in the toolbox and so forth. And again, finding the balance to making all of that happen, okay? Not only environmentally, but, you know, from an economic standpoint. You know, you're always on the bubble and finding that thing. So, you know, how many planners do we have in the room? Or we got, yes, we have one, Janice, okay. They're all up here, okay. I'm looking over here, they're all behind me, as far as that goes. So, any other questions that we have? Laura, you have any, okay, sure, I know you're.
Thank you, Dave. So a question about water efficiency and Legionella. We don't talk much about that, but water needs to move in pipes. Water, you know, the building efficiency, the question over here about building efficiencies, and you're making that connection when, you know, it's great to have an efficient building, but if that water's not moving and there's no demand in that water and you have water sitting, you know, the breeding of Legionella. Legionella, by the way, is out there. It's already in water systems. So I just throw that out there. I know Marianne, we were just chatting.
So this has been a big issue, and water efficiency has been blamed for a lot of the Legionella outbreaks because of the distribution system flows are going slower than they had been historically because of the declining flows, but also because our systems were basically sized for higher flow. So now that the flows are reduced, they're moving slower through the distribution system. And the chlorine residual is not making it to the customer's meter all the time. So the utilities have to flush water, which of course, when water's flowing down the street being flushed, that's not a great conservation message. But if they don't do this flushing, then the chlorine residual sometimes isn't enough to keep Legionella from growing. And we're seeing lots of Legionella outbreaks. So there's going to be increased attention. The Water Research Foundation is funding premise plumbing work to try and figure out what the intersection is. I think no one wants to go to on-site dosing of chlorine, but you know, that's, I think, one of the strategies that's being looked at. But by APMO, the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials, they're looking at changing Hunter's curve, which had been the design standard for pipe sizing since 1943 or something like that. Nothing's changed. So the Hunter's curve now is being reevaluated and pipe sizing is being revisited. So that'll help, but it's still not going to address the short-term problem of the fact that we are finding Legionella. And so I think the statistics from CDC were something like, 59% of waterborne illnesses are Legionella, but 98% of the deaths are Legionella. So it's toxic when it happens. And so cooling tower management has become a big issue. Declining flows in places like hospitals has become an issue. Even there were deaths in Chicago from a fountain in a hotel lobby that had lighting along the base and was heating up the water to the point where it was perfect optimum growing temperature for Legionella. Our hot water tanks, if you turn it down to 120 because the energy folks tell you to do that, you are growing Legionella in your hot water tank because that's the optimal temperature. You got to turn it up to 140. So these are issues that we have to start getting the message out. It's become a big topic.
Great. And again, from a standpoint of new technologies, again, just circling back to our roundtable discussions here, the new technologies, obviously, Tom, you've got a lot of new technologies coming down in the irrigation side and going from there. But those outcomes, I think, as Mary Ann, so eloquently alluded to. By the way, if you guys haven't gotten and seen the Alliance for Water Efficiency website and you're not a member, please consider doing that, because there's so many resources that this lady has put together, okay, in her tenure as CEO of the Water Alliance. It's phenomenal, and they're all there, and it helps them do their research, so consider being a member. And again, Mary Ann, thank you. I know you don't toot your own horn, but I'm going to toot it for you. And so forth. So that's huge. Any other questions that we have as far as in relation to the water efficiency laws? Anything coming down the pike in Washington? I know you just got back from the Beltway at 3 o'clock this morning.
Yeah, well, not that things go in the Beltway very quickly, but we're in discussions about getting the rebates you give to customers, getting to be federally tax exempt. And so the meeting I had yesterday was on a piece of legislation that's been proposed. It's been proposed for the past 3 Congresses. It just never moves. That would make water conservation and efficiency rebates and rebates for distributed green infrastructure also income tax exempt. Because the IRS law requires that if you as a utility are issuing $600 or more of rebate money to any one customer, you have to send them a 1099 at the end of the year, and then they get taxed on it. So a toilet rebate's not going to get you to the $600 level, but anything in irrigation is definitely going to get you up there. So if you're not sending out 1099s, they're technically speaking, it is a tax liability for your customers. So we have to fix this, not only because it's a pain to send out the 1099s, but because the customers get angry when they get a 1099 when they did something that you asked them to do as a public service. So this is an issue in the irrigation side. It's becoming a real problem. So this is something we're working on too.
Tom, anything on new technology that you want to mention?
And it's not just our product, but there's a lot of choices out there for more efficient irrigation controllers. And, as an industry, water on, off, odd, even, really doesn't bother us. We just want it to be, fair and equitable and not suffer as an industry. So other than that, we're trying our part to be as efficient as we can on the irrigation side.
Any other questions do we have? Mike, do you have any comment here? Okay. Again, ladies and gentlemen, we got one more question. And before we ask this question, Romana has put evaluation forms on everybody's table. Please fill those out, because they're so important to us as a section, getting feedback on direction, on where we're going, how we did. We want to make sure that we're kind of hitting the mark here.
So I didn't actually introduce myself before. I'm Peter Roberto. I am the I&E president of New England. My colleagues in Connecticut as well. One thing I will say about technology, you guys are water purveyors, and it's our job to provide stuff for our clients too. You make money off of us. And I'm all for conservation. Sometimes with the new technology, which is all we install anymore, we don't give our clients the option. Everything's Wi-Fi based, weather controls. We pay for airport services for those controls as a trying to conserve water ourselves. When you guys do 2 days a week watering, you actually take that control away from technology. That actually, if you looked at the actual watering, I think Tom showed you a slide earlier, most of my clients' controllers didn't even water for the past 2 months, or 1 day a month. If you tell them they're forced to water on certain days of the week, if they had technology.
So the ordinance doesn't say you have to water 2 days a week. It says you can only water 2 days a week. So what would happen is if you did the system right and you said, and whatever the days were, let's say they get to water on Tuesday and Saturday, then it's like, okay, all of a sudden your system pops up that on Friday they should water. It just wouldn't let them water till Saturday, and my guess is the lawn wouldn't die in that one more day. So that's the way the system would work.
No, I understand that.
If it rains on Friday, then you don't need to. Yeah.
Correct, and that's what the computer is reprogramming itself to do all the time. We're not doing it.
Yeah.
It's technology that's actually doing it.
Yeah, so I think the technology is there to be able to program this in extremely easily, And I appreciate all the folks who have the really sophisticated systems, but I think when you are dealing with people across the board, that, having the 2-day system is important, because you don't need to water more than twice a week. And so even if it's calling for it, and I think that Vicki made that point, I think, earlier, that we know that it's still calling for sometimes more water than is needed, so.
I agree 100%. And we have systems out there, we've been trying to pass a rain sensor bill now, Chris, for what, 5 years in Massachusetts?
Yeah.
You know?
It took Connecticut 5 years to get it added to an already existing rain sensor bill for commercial and government buildings. So it took another 5 years, but that's
And there's one
a
town-
different story.
and there's one
cogs of
town-
government move slow.
One town in Massachusetts that actually, Mansfield, gives a $250 rebate for installing a rain sensor. But they're the only ones in the Commonwealth. I think there's 2 other towns that do it, but for $50 or whatever, But thank you.
All right, before we close here, Lori would like to ask a question. So, Lori?
But Dave, you were going to speak up. You had something?
Thank you, Lori. Back in '16, when we were going through the drought, I did an analysis and found that water-cooled ice machines use 17 gallons of water as coolant to make 10 pounds of ice. Now, for a facility like this in country clubs, you're talking about tremendous amounts of water. So my question would be, is there any kind of national initiative to get rid of those things or ban those water coolers?
So this is actually worse than you think, because the energy efficiency community maintains that to go to an air-cooled ice maker, which would save all that water, is too energy intensive. So their standards specify water cooling.
We had a merchant.
So this is a battle we're having with the energy efficiency
A
community.
merchant in town who had a fish market got rid of his water-cooled machine because it cost him more through the sewer use fee than it did for the water
Yeah.
fee to buy the water. So it was more expensive to get rid of the water than it was to buy it.
So we actually hired a specialist on ice machines, Bill Hoffman, to write 20 pages of comments for the Department of Energy on why their standard was wrong for water-cooled ice makers, and why they should be going to, if not fully air-cooled, at least some sort of interim standard that would combine it, and so far we've been ignored.
Thank you.
So I just have a question for everyone on the panel. What would you suggest is a priority item, priority work item or action item that the State Water Planning Council and the implementation group work on that concerns water conservation? So everybody, if you could.
I'll start. I think the law for having a rain sensor installed on the residential and government and all buildings, all new construction, is antiquated, and I think the next step is a smart controller be in place.
I'll amplify his comment and say that there are probably a suite of laws that Connecticut could look at that have been adopted in other states, one of them being water sense level plumbing standards. That could be probably pretty simply done. Connecticut was one of the first states in 1989 to pass the 1.6 gallon per flush toilet. I think Massachusetts and Connecticut were like 2 of the first, thanks to Amy's work. But I think there's lots more that could be done. And I think the second issue, especially after hearing Dave's talk, I think we do have to address the issue of revenue erosion from conservation. It's a disincentive to utility programs if they think there's no way to get around the revenue stability issue, but there is. And so that's something that could be a very productive activity.
Yeah, so I'm going to just, first of all, I'm listening because I'm on the implementation team with Lori, but I have to agree with Mary Ann is and what we did with the decoupling with the private, we need to fix whatever is the problem with water conservation with our regional and municipal. It's got to be a priority because we're going to get nowhere if they can't embrace water conservation.
Yeah, I don't have anything more to add to that. It's true.
I would say public outreach if you want your message of water conservation out there, there has to be a greater degree of public outreach. It's just educating the groups.
State funds 4 regional half-day workshops for chief elected officials, public works directors, and planners, both elected, appointed, and professional planners, to brief them on the water plan and to get them going on their own local plans. Is that specific enough? All you gotta do is get Governor Spring with the money.
I'm an advocate for the unseen resource of groundwater and having some mechanism to really understand when our groundwater levels are being depleted.
Okay, I agree with Mike here. I think outreach and best guidances be shared with consumers is very powerful. The accessibility of the new technology and the costs associated with that, I think is important. And also, I think in commercial applications, possibly getting legislation in place for the recycling of rainwater coming off impervious surfaces, especially if those places have irrigation demands. Might be an avenue worthwhile.
Did you write all that down, Lori? Okay, we're going to have a quiz next week, okay, just double check it. All right, again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for participating today. I hope you all found it as useful and educating and so forth. I think as a committee going forth, if you would like to become involved in our Water Sustainability Committee, please shoot me an email, and we're going to be having the presentations posted on the Connecticut section website as well as the CWWA website. And again, all these people up here, okay, are resources that you, as whether you're a water utility official, a town official, a planning and zoning, a contractor, a subcontractor, or a consultant, that please, my adage, okay, in life is don't try to recreate the wheel if it's already there. So again, thank you all for coming. Please fill out the evaluation forms, and as those that are signed up for CEUs, make sure you sign out and get your certificate from Ramada. And again, I think our next conference that we're going to be doing is we're going to be focusing more on the energy side of things to go from there. But if you have initiatives that or topics that you feel that we need to cover, please reach out to us, any one of us, as far as that goes. And we'll be more than happy to look at that. We usually meet once every 4 to 6 weeks at the Portland Library. If you can't make it there, you can call in. We have a conference bridge. And again, thank you all for coming. And we want to thank St. Clements for doing such a yeoman's job for basically all of the hospitality. So thank you all.
Me neither. I passed by it, but I've never been down here. I was like, wow.
I'm always laughing when you show up, because I'm like,